Reuters reports citing two unnamed US officials. Three people killed and one injured as a small plane crashes in South Florida near a major interstate highway and railroad tracks. Video shows a car on fire after the crash near Boca Raton Airport.
Forward, but the president has made it very clear he's open to a deal with China.
Why is he optimistic that China's going to make a deal or wants to make a deal if they're not talking? Where's that optimism come from?
He's optimistic.
White House says US President Donald Trump is optimistic about striking a trade deal with China even as the world's two largest economies clash over tariffs.
I want them not to have a nuclear weapon. I want Iran to be a wonderful, great, happy country. But they can't have a nuclear weapon. And we're negotiating with them on Saturday.
Ahead of US-Iran talks today, President Donald Trump wants Tehran all hell to pay if it does not abandon its nuclear program, makes it clear that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. Trump's West Asia envoy Steve Witkoff says Israeli hostages held in Gaza could be freed within days as a serious deal is taking shape, raising new hopes for a breakthrough. Turkey President Erdogan accuses Israel of sowing divisions in Syria to dynamite the revolution that toppled the Assad regime. Says Ankara won't remain blind to Syria being dragged into a vortex of instability. MS Dhoni returns as captain, but it's another defeat for the Chennai Super Kings. The Kolkata Knight Riders eased to an 8-wicket win to hand CSK a third straight defeat at home. Now, fears of an economic slowdown have risen sharply since Trump unveiled widespread tariffs last week, sparking a sell-off in the stock market. Trump has now paused some of those import levies for 90 days. But that move has not been enough to restore confidence in the economy. BlackRock CEO Larry Fink has told CNBC that he thinks that they are very close, if not already, in a recession now. He added that the US economy has weakened to a point of growth possibly turning negative. In fact, Fink said that the 90-day pause means longer, more elevated uncertainty. This brief optimism following the pause, it's evaporated. On Thursday, markets rallied. By Friday, the rally had crumbled as China announced retaliatory tariffs on American goods of up to 125%. The US dollar plunged, losing its footing as a global safe haven. It fell to a decade low against the Swiss franc and a 3-year low versus the euro. At the same time, borrowing costs surged, sending shockwaves through bond markets, already jittery over a potential economic contraction. But despite his tariff policy triggering worries, Trump has struck a confident tone. He says they are doing very well and that the policy is very exciting for America and that the world is already moving along quickly. The White House says Trump is optimistic about striking a trade deal with China, even as the two largest economies in the world continue to clash.
But the president has made it very clear he's open to a deal with China.
Why is he optimistic that China's going to make a deal or wants to make a deal if they're not talking? Where's that optimism come from?
He's optimistic.
White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt also said that there are more than 15 trade offers already on the table, insisting that they've heard from over 75 countries seeking to avoid higher tariffs.
To the heart of your question, the president has spoke about the trillions of dollars that he expects in revenue from tariffs and how we can use it to pay down our debt and to ensure that we are no longer faced with a crippling national debt in the trillions that is going to bankrupt our nation for future generations. So that money coming back home will make America in the green rather than in the red.
But the Trump administration's efforts to reassure Americans in the world don't seem to be quelling worries. According to UN trade agency, If the US applies its proposed tariffs in the coming months, global trade could shrink by 3%, global GDP could reduce by 0.7% by 2040, and the least developed countries are most exposed to its instabilities. All right, to discuss this further, we're now being joined by Robert Koeb from Los Angeles. He is a director of Asia Pacific Geoeconomic and Business Initiative, Chapman University, joining us live. Thank you so much for joining us on World DNA.
Thank you.
Now, let's get right into it. Of course, fears of an economic slowdown have risen sharply. Markets have had a roller coaster ride, to say the least. China and the United States are on a collision course. What is your assessment of this statement that has come out by BlackRock CEO Larry Fink, who's told that he thinks that the United States is very close, if not already, in a recession?
Well, as an economist, I have to first point out it's not possible for us to already be in a recession. That's at least 2 quarters of declining growth, and we're not there yet. But I think to Mr. Fink's point, what he's trying to intimate is that we are on the way to a recession, and that there are so many negative indicators that it's to the point of inevitability. I don't think that's universally shared. It's interesting, Goldman Sachs, for example, just raised their probability of a recession to 45%. That's up from 35%. So it's not universally accepted that for sure there will be a recession, but I would have to agree with his general assessment that things are not looking good. The Trump administration just keeps piling on the negative factors.
Thank you so much for clarifying that, because that is exactly what I was going to come to next as to what the basis for this statement was. But thank you so much for clarifying that. That being said, now Trump says that he is optimistic that they could have a deal with China. There doesn't seem to be much basis for it, considering that China has refused to back down completely. It's put retaliatory tariffs on American goods of up to 125%. How do you see things going forward?
Well, interesting you mentioned the 125%, because I've been asked a number of times over the recent days, who's going to blink first? And you could say China just blinked, or at least gave a half a blink, because they said, along with raising the tariff to 125%, that they wouldn't raise it anymore. So that seems to be the olive branch. And that's the opening, if the Trump administration knows how to play it, to restart discussions. And that seems to be at the crux of the matter. They've never really talked to China in a serious way. There's been some reports that there were some back channel attempts, but nothing like a serious effort at dialogue. And apparently Trump is also insisting that she calls him, which is also very wishful thinking, to say the least. I think the Trump administration, starting with President Trump himself, is a bit delusional in thinking that China is just begging for a deal. Yes, they're hurting, and you could make a very good case that they're going to hurt more than the U.S., but they are not coming in a supplicant manner the way the Trump administration seems to expect. So they're going to have to negotiate carefully and really navigate, I should say, first, and use that opportunity of them saying they're not going to raise tariffs anymore. The U.S. now has 20% higher tariff than China does, and use that as an opening.
You raise a very pertinent point there that would explain why there is some optimism as to China somewhat softening its stance with this 125% retaliatory tariffs. That being said, we also did hear that a statement coming out of China saying that the European Union and China should align with each other to defy this unilateral bullying, is what they've called it. That being said, this 90-day pause, how do you assess that? Do you think something good could come out of this?
Yeah, I would say that's the other, out of a lot of really unintelligent moves, is the most charitable way to describe them from an economic standpoint, that the Trump administration has been making recently. That is one of the better ones. That's relatively speaking, but having gone after all sorts of countries, including, of course, India, it has now said, okay, we're going to lower the tension. bring the tariffs down to only 10%. That's still significant, but it's a big reduction over what they were for most of these important trading partners. And having that 90-day pause gives some breathing room and hopefully some productive negotiations. I would note that probably the best sign of that is that Secretary of the Treasury, Scott Bessent, has said he's going to be having negotiations with Tokyo. And when you look at Asia, that's the number 2 economy after China. And it's arguably America's most important strategic partner in the Asia Pacific. India would obviously be perhaps right up there if we include the broader area of the Indo-Pacific. But as a treaty ally and important, really a vital trading partner in the region, having these discussions at first with Japan is an encouraging sign.
Right now, just for better understanding for our viewers here as well, market sentiment does remain negative. Do you see fears easing sometime in the near future?
Well, it's there's fear and there's uncertainty, and there's actually some difference between the two. So we tend to think of fear as being measured by volatility. Uncertainty means everything kind of gets frozen in place, or there's no sense of momentum or logical direction. So what you have more than anything right now is uncertainty, and that's compounded by the fear. So not to sound too technical, but there are two factors at work here. So the overwhelming sense is actually the uncertainty. There are a lot of people who believe, at least in the United States, in what the Trump administration is trying to do. He has, in fact, Larry Fink, for example, the beginning of our conversation being around his comments, he's notable for saying, although he's more aligned with the Democratic Party and Democratic causes, he actually said before the November 2024 election that he felt there wouldn't be much difference if Kamala Harris or Donald Trump won. He's obviously not thinking that now. But, also in his comments about the sense of a recession already being underway was this notion of uncertainty being the really big issue here. And I would totally concur with that. So the problem with uncertainty is there's no sense of how to go forward. There's no business planning. The consumers don't know what to do. It's that really freezes things in place. There are going to be some people who will support Trump's moves and will be encouraged by those. So that isn't such a big issue with fear in that regard. But the uncertainty is everywhere because no one really knows what the Trump administration plans to do going forward and how long, if they do make a move, that will stay in place because there's so much back and forth.
Right. In fact, we were joined by Mr. Andrew Ferris yesterday. We were speaking to him, and there's one thing that he said, that the only thing Trump is really consistent with is being inconsistent. So I believe uncertainty and being inconsistent, that really is the consistent theme here. Of course, there'll be lots more to discuss with Trump back in the White House. Thank you so much for joining us on World DNA this morning with your insights and perspective on this.
Thank you.
Let's shift our focus now. Turkey President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has accused Israel of sowing divisions in Syria to dynamite the revolution that toppled Bashar al-Assad regime. Erdogan told a diplomacy forum in Antalya that Israel is trying to dynamite the December 8th revolution by stirring up ethnic and religious affiliations and turning minorities in Syria against the government. He warned that Turkey will not turn a blind eye to Syria being dragged into a new vortex of instability.
The people of Syria are fed but with pain, oppression and war. No one should misunderstand or misinterpret our patience and our attitude towards resolving issues through dialogue. Our calmness should not lead some people into very wrong ambitions.
Now, Erdogan's latest comments came as officials from Turkey and Israel began talks this week aimed at easing tensions over Syria as the two regional powers jostle for influence in the politically fragile country. Turkey is a key backer of Syria's new leader, Ahmad al-Shara, whose Islamist group, Hayat al-Tahrir Sham, HTS, has said that the rebel coalition that ousted Assad in December. Israel has launched airstrikes and ground incursions to keep Syrian forces away from its border, sparking criticism from Ankara. According to a Syrian source close to the matter, Turkey wants to set up military positions in Syria, including one inside the T4 base, a military airbase in Homs province targeted by Israeli strikes last week. On the sidelines of the diplomacy forum in Turkey's Antalya, Erdogan has also met with Syrian President Ahmed al-Shara and assured him that Ankara will continue its diplomatic efforts to lift international sanctions against Syria. The Syrian Foreign Ministry said that the talks also addressed strengthening joint cooperation between the two countries in different sectors. It was Shara's second trip to Turkey as leader after Erdogan welcomed him to Ankara in February. Shara also met with Qatar's foreign minister. Now, tensions have flared in Brazil's capital as indigenous communities have staged protests against a controversial land law. On Thursday, thousands of indigenous activists marched in Brasilia demanding protection of their ancestral land. Clashes broke out outside Congress as security forces fired tear gas to disperse the crowds near the legislative building.
This is our second march from the protest camp here in Brasilia, the federal capital, bringing together the plurality of native people of Brazil. The main objective of this camp is to demand our rights and guarantee our continued existence in our territories. Unfortunately, we need to defend ourselves from loggers, miners and businesses that are roaming our territories.
Now, protesters and firefighters quickly moved to help those affected by the tear gas. At the center of the unrest is a 2023 law backed by Brazil's powerful farm lobby. Indigenous groups say the law strips them of their constitutional land rights. The dispute now rests with Supreme Court Justice Gilmar Mendes, who last year formed a conciliation chamber to negotiate between farmers and indigenous representatives. But tensions deepened this week as the APIB, Brazil's largest indigenous coalition, walked out of negotiations, calling them a violation of their rights. Indigenous communities are now urging the court to strike down the law. Now, India has achieved a big milestone in its indigenous weapons program, with the Air Force moving towards inducting a homegrown precision strike weapon with long-range standoff capabilities. The Defense Research and Development Organization held successful release trials of the long-range glide bomb Gaurav. The weapon was integrated to multiple stations in different warhead configurations. The Su-30 MKI jet carried out the evaluations, showcasing a readiness for operational deployment. The tests validate the bomb's performance, accuracy and integration with the IAF's frontline fighter jet. Gaurav is an air-launched precision-guided glide bomb in the 1,000-kilogram class, designed to strike targets from long distances. It can be launched from standoff ranges, which means pilots can strike targets deep inside enemy territory without entering hostile airspace. Completion of trials effectively paves the way for induction of the weapon into Indian Air Force. Reports say the Indian Air Force plans to acquire 300 units of the Gaurav LRGB to enhance deep penetration strike capabilities. No induction dates announced yet. With all on track, it could happen soon. It's official, Mohamed Salah has signed a new 2-year contract with Liverpool till 2027. The new deal ends a long contract saga which had Liverpool fans fearing the Egyptian star would leave the club at the end of the current season. The club made the announcement on social media on Friday. Salah has put pen to paper on a 2-year deal which sees him extend his 8-year stay at Anfield. The news comes after months of negotiations between Salah's representatives and the club. Salah's current contract was coming to an end in the summer, and he had stated several times over the course of the current season that he was far away from securing a new deal. He is linked with the move to Saudi Pro League, and the Reds even rejected a $190 million bid from Al Ittihad in 2023. But all that speculation has now been put to bed. 32-year-old Salah made this statement after signing the new deal. It's great. I had my best years here. I played 8 years. Hopefully it's going to be 10. Enjoying my life here, enjoying my football. I would like to say to the fans, I'm very, very happy to be here. I signed here because I believe we can win a lot of big trophies together. Manager Arne Slot praised Liverpool sporting director Richard Hughes in getting this deal through.
Maybe for the fans it was a pleasant surprise. I knew it a bit longer, of course, that things were heading in the right direction, and I think it's also a big compliment for Richard that he achieved to extend Mo Salah, who is such a great player, on as a free agent, can go probably to every club in the world wherever he wants to. But he stayed at our club, and that's also a compliment for Richard, I think.
Now, these are the details of Salah's contract. Salah will reportedly earn £400,000 per week, which translates to approximately $523,000. He was already the highest paid player in the club's history, and now he becomes one of the highest paid players in Europe. The Liverpool owners have broken a golden rule for Salah, as they were earlier reluctant to hand out high-wage contracts to players over 30 years old. The immediate priority for Salah and Liverpool is to win the Premier League this season. The Reds are on course to win the title and are 11 points clear of second-place Arsenal at the top of the table. Salah is the top scorer in the Premier League this season with 27 goals. In fact, Salah's performances since he joined from AS Roma in 2017 have been incredible. He scored 243 goals and delivered 109 assists in 393 appearances. That means he's been one of the key figures in a successful period for the club. Salah has won the Premier League, Champions League, among several other trophies in his 8-year spell so far. This is not the only good piece of news for Liverpool fans. Captain Virgil van Dijk is also expected to sign a New Year deal this week. However, defender Trent Alexander-Arnold has been heavily linked with the move to European champions Real Madrid. The 26-year-old is also out of contract in the summer. And with that, it's a wrap on this edition of World DNA. We're leaving you with all the climate stories which are making headlines across the world today. Thank you so much for joining us. Ready to dive into your daily dose of news?
Bringing you what's trending in the West and all that's setting trends in the East.
And all of this served up with a side of insightful banter.
We don't just bring you the latest stories.
We bring you your talking points for the day.
And while you do that, from the busy streets of New York, I will provide you with deeper insights on the developments through the course of the day in the U.S.
The show that keeps you ahead of the global curve. A conversation you'd want to be a part of.
A place where news becomes an engaging exchange.
We bring you stories that impact your present.
This is World DNA.
Join the conversation.
This week on the West Asia Post. Tensions over Iran's nuclear program continue to mount. Can US President reach a nuclear deal with Iran the second time around? While Trump reiterates that Gaza war will end soon.
Well, I'd like to see the war stop, and I think the war will stop at some point.
Netanyahu stays non-committal to a permanent ceasefire. Also on the show, we tell you what preconditions Hezbollah has set for disarmament and opposition's challenge to Turkey's Erdogan. Watch the West Asia Post with me, Radi Francis, only on WION, World is One.
The African Growth and Opportunity Act AGOA thrown into disarray following President Trump's tariffs on African countries, including Lesotho. The tariffs could be a death knell for US-Africa trade parked. South Africa, Zimbabwe and the AU react. A wedding becomes emblematic of Eastern Congo's ongoing turmoil as M23 control over the region leaves couples in legal limbo. And teams from all over the world take to the pitch at the annual Granny's World Cup in South Africa's far north, with 30-minute games played at a slow but purposeful pace. Watch World of Africa at these times on WION. World is One.
From the bustling trading floors of Wall Street to the vibrant exchanges of Asian stock markets, WION breaks it down for you to make sense of what's happening, as we reveal the key factors behind events, strategic battles, and the game-changing business decisions that shape the world. We bring you all of this and more on World Business Watch. WION, India's global voice, the channel that brings you the biggest stories from across the world through India's lens. Now available in more than 190 countries worldwide, because we believe that the world is one. Watch us in Africa, Europe, USA and Canada, South America, Asia Pacific, Middle East and North African regions. Also available on these digital platforms across the world. WION, World is One.
Busting the myths around tokenization, catch me on Token Money Magnet, only on WION.
The Earth is sending distress signals. Wildfires, droughts, and melting glaciers. Can we reverse the damage? Explore the harrowing effects of climate change. It's a wake-up call. Global emergency. Climate Tracker on WION, World is One. WION,
India's global voice, the channel that brings you the biggest stories from across the world through India's lens. Now available in more than 190 countries worldwide, because we believe that the world is one. Watch us in Africa, Europe, USA and Canada, South America, Asia Pacific, Middle East and North African regions. Also available on these digital platforms across the world. WION, World is One.
Hello there and welcome. Thank you for joining us. This is WION World is One. We are glad you're watching. I'm Eric Njoka. Let's begin with our top stories at this hour. Sources say NIA to confront Mumbai attack accused Tahawurul Rana with disclosures about his role by David Headley. Will also be confronted with his own testimony given to the FBI and Illinois court. US Vice President J.D. Vance and National Security Advisor Mike Waltz are likely to visit India around April 21st and 25th as New Delhi wants to finalize a bilateral deal with the US amid Trump's tariff pause. US Special Envoy Steve Witkoff tells President Trump that giving Moscow's ownership of 4 occupied Ukrainian regions will be fastest way to achieve ceasefire, Reuters reports citing 2 unnamed US officials.
Forward, but the president has made it very clear he's open to a deal with China.
Why is he optimistic that China's going to make a deal or wants to make a deal? If they're not talking, where's that optimism come
He's
from?
optimistic.
The White House says US President Donald Trump is optimistic about striking a trade deal with China, even as the world's 2 largest economies clash over tariffs.
I want them not to have a nuclear weapon. I want Iran to be a wonderful, great, happy country. But they can't have a nuclear weapon. And we're negotiating with them on Saturday.
Ahead of US-Iran talks today, President Donald Trump warns Tehran all hell to pay if it does not abandon its nuclear program, makes it clear that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. Trump's West Asia envoy Steve Witkoff says Israeli hostages held in Gaza could be freed within days as a serious deal is taking shape, raising new hopes of a breakthrough. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan accuses Israel of sowing divisions in Syria to dynamite the revolution that toppled Assad regime, says Ankara will not remain blind to Syria being dragged into vortex of instability.